Yerrick Doran had never been one to heed warnings, especially not the cryptic ones found in the debris of forgotten star beacons or on ancient star maps lost to the ravages of time. He thrived where others faltered, in the desolate stretches of dead ships and shattered moons. While most saw danger in the wreckage, Yerrick saw stories, forgotten relics with tales buried deep within their decaying frames. The signal had appeared out of nowhere, a weak pulse emanating from the edge of the Varnese belt, an endless region of twisted hulls and cracked moons drifting aimlessly through space. Yerrick had tracked it for days, watching the erratic flicker of the beacon on his ship's console. It was a distress call, but not one of typical make. It was old, weak, and faintly alive, as if the signal had a heartbeat of its own. He followed it, and it led him to the graveyard of a forgotten ship. Floating amidst the void, it resembled a shattered husk of metal, its hull bent inward, as though some cosmic force had crushed it from within. It hung silently in the air, half buried in a cloud of space dust, tethered only by the weight of time and memory. Jarrick's ship docked with a reluctant groan. The dim lights inside flickered erratically as he disembarked, his boots crunching over the frost-coated metal of the abandoned craft. The air was cold and lifeless, carrying the stillness of death. He didn't expect to find anything alive, but as he ventured into the ship's collapsed hold, something caught his eye. Tethered by chains fused to the ship's frame was a massive creature, its form too large to fit comfortably in the cramped space, too still to be alive. Its pale, almost translucent skin shimmered under the dim light, fractured with the remnants of distant stars. Long, spiraling horns jutted from its skull like blades of frozen ice, and vast wings were draped across shattered crates. Yerrick didn't speak, nor did he move, transfixed by the sight. Then, slowly, the creature's eye opened. For a moment, the room seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. It didn't growl, nor did it roar. It merely watched him with eyes full of silent history. Then it spoke, not with words, but with a whisper that vibrated in his mind. "You are not one of them." Jarrick's heart raced. He stepped forward, voice trembling. I'm a mechanic. I came for your signal." The creature blinked slowly. "They left me here in silence. I cannot move." Jarrick's eyes narrowed as he noticed the chains, glowing with an ethereal crimson hue. They were not like anything he had ever seen, not made of metal but something far older, and alive in a way he couldn't comprehend. He focused on them, studying the alien circuitry entwined in the chains. "You're paralyzed," Yerrick whispered. "My spine was severed before they bound me. My fire was drained, my wings silenced." Yerrick felt something stir within him. It wasn't fear nor awe. It was something deeper. He exhaled, almost ashamed. "I don't know what I can do." "You came," the creature murmured. "That is more than any soul has done in 100 years. The ship creaked ominously, and for the first time, Yerrick no longer saw just a dragon. He saw someone who had been forgotten, left to perish alone. The next few hours blurred together. Yerrick returned to his ship, grabbing every tool he could carry. Scanners, cutters, pulse drivers, even a prototype laser torch he hadn't used in years. He brought them all to the wreck and began working, determined to free the creature from its chains. The restraints were far beyond anything he had ever encountered. Laced with strange alien circuitry, they resisted his scans, pulsing with programmed malice. Each time he came close, the chains hissed as though alive, pushing him away. The creature, whom Yerrick had begun to think of as Arichitar, watched in silence, the weight of countless years pressing down on them both. "I need to know your name," Yerrick said softly as he worked on one of the largest shackles. "I need something to call you." The creature's gaze flickered for a moment. "They call me Arichitar." Yerrick nodded. "Well, Arichitar, I don't care how long you've been here. No one deserves this." The dragon didn't respond, but Yerrick could sense something in the air, an understanding. Yerrick worked tirelessly, each movement slow and deliberate. The first chain came off with a hiss of energy, and Arichitar's eye shifted toward him. Yerrick smiled faintly, almost in disbelief. "I told you," Yerrick said softly. "I never cared much about what should happen." The air around them shifted slightly as Arichitar's wing twitched, a movement barely noticeable, but a movement nonetheless. The creature's breath was no longer shallow. It was real, filled with a life Yerrick hadn't thought possible. Days passed, and Yerrick returned again and again to the broken ship, bringing tools, schematics, and more supplies. He worked as if he were fixing a long-forgotten machine. But there was no manual, no instructions for repairing an alien creature paralyzed by chains older than time itself. At one point, he approached the restraint around Arichytar's spine. These chains were far more dangerous, embedded into his very flesh. Arichytar winced as Yerrick touched them. His eyes narrowed in pain. "This pain has defined me for 100 years," Arichytar's voice echoed in Jarrek's mind. Yerrick hesitated. "You don't have to be who you were," he whispered. "You can be something else. Something free." For a long time, Arichytar said nothing, but eventually he nodded. The work was difficult, resistant, painful, but Yerrick persevered, bypassing fuses, rerouting power lines. Finally, after hours of meticulous work, the chains cracked and fell away. Arichytar's body arched, a sharp intake of breath filling the air as though he were taking his first breath in centuries. His wings, though weak and trembling, flared out, brushing against the broken ceiling of the ship. The chains were gone, but Arichytar was still far from whole. But it was enough. One morning, Yerrick stood outside his hangar, the air thick with tension. Over the horizon, ships began to descend. 5 of them, shaped like sleek daggers made of blackened crystal. They hovered without a sound, the clouds parting for them. Arichytar stirred inside, his breath catching. "I know those vessels," he whispered. "Old enemies, worse judges." The ships landed silently around Jarrek's homestead, and 5 figures emerged. Tall, draped in flowing robes of shimmering silver, their skin glowed like polished pearls. Their eyes were full, as if carrying the weight of forgotten histories. The leader of the figures stepped forward, his voice smooth and cold. "We detected a signal, a breach, a resurrection." Yerrick crossed his arms, watching. "You came to make sure he stays dead." The figure tilted its head. "We came to confirm what should be impossible." Behind Yerrick, Arichytar emerged. He was still weak, his wings dragging behind him, but his eyes were full of the storm that shook the air. "You chained me in silence," Arichytar said, his voice rising with raw power. "You buried me in metal and ghosts, and still I rise." One of the envoys hissed. "You were forged as a weapon. You turned against your purpose." "No." Arichytar's voice was calm. "I turned toward mercy." The envoy stepped back, but then something miraculous happened. The silver around Arichytar's spine pulsed with light. The scars, the wounds Yerrick had healed, now glowed as if burning with the energy of the stars themselves. The 5 ships lowered their weapons in silent surrender. Arichytar stood tall, a glow of rebirth surrounding him. His wings stretched wide, touching the very sky. His voice wasn't a roar, it was a song of creation, a song that resonated across the sky. And for the first time in centuries, the envoys bowed to him, not as a prisoner, but as a legend reborn. Yerrick stood to the side, covered in grease and oil, his hands trembling, unsure whether he had repaired a dragon or broken some sacred balance. Either way, he had awakened something far greater than he could have imagined. The sky turned darker, and the envoys didn't speak again. They knelt in silence, honoring what Yerrick had unknowingly resurrected. And the world itself held its breath. The ships had powered down, their silent forms now lingering in the distance. The envoys, motionless as statues, formed a quiet circle around Jarrek's homestead, watching with a mix of awe and unspoken questions. They recorded the spectacle of Arichytar's recovery, their hands trembling despite their composed demeanor. None dared to intervene. None tried to claim him. The fear had been replaced with a deep reverence, and Yerrick could see it in their eyes. They were witnessing something that no protocol could have ever prepared them for. Inside the hangar, Arichytar lay sprawled across half of the cold floor, massive and majestic. Even in the midst of his healing, his tail twitched every now and then as Yerrick worked on the fusion coil near his spinal brace. He kept the stabilizers engaged, preventing the dragon's old wounds from collapsing under the rising energy coursing through him. "You're burning brighter each day," Yerrick muttered, tightening the last bolt. I can feel my wings again, Arthur said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Do you think I'll fly soon? Yarrick paused, a small laugh escaping his lips. I'm a mechanic, not a pilot. You're a mechanic who fixed a starborn creature with rusted tools and sheer will. Arachitar replied, that makes you far more than just a pilot. Yarrick looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of those words. You don't need me. Not anymore. Arachitar's voice softened. I needed you more than I needed freedom. Yarrick stopped in his tracks. He turned to face the dragon, the being who had once been trapped in chains and forgotten beneath dust, the one whose name had been lost to time. And there in those star-forged eyes, he saw something unyielding, something ancient. You really believe that? He asked softly. You didn't just repair my body, Arachitar replied. You remember my name. Outside, the wind picked up and something in the sky shimmered. Arachitar lifted his head, his gaze sharp. The stars are calling. Yarrick followed the dragon's gaze, squinting at the horizon. You're sure? They know I've returned, Arachitar murmured, and not all of them will bow. Yarrick glanced toward his garage. A half-finished ship frame sat beneath dusty tarps. Another forgotten project he had never had the courage to complete. I suppose it's about time I finished that old bird, he said. Arachitar smiled, his eyes glowing like fading suns. You've always had wings. You just forgot how to build them. Then the dragon stood taller, his body rippling with newfound strength. The last of his paralysis had faded, and with it, a storm began to gather on the horizon, not of wind or fire, but of stories waiting to be written. The hangar doors creaked open slowly, their rusted tracks groaning under the weight of anticipation. Yarrick stood beside the control panel, hand hovering over the final lever, his gaze fixed on the dragon to the mist rising between them. The dragon's silver wings stretched wider than the hangar could contain. He looked almost too large for the sky itself. Ready? Yarrick asked, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Arachitar didn't answer. He simply walked forward, each step heavy but sure, until his claws met the open earth. The envoys had gathered beyond the cliffs, their ships casting long shadows across the valley. They didn't speak. They didn't interfere. They stood as witnesses, watching the return of something ancient, something forgotten. Yarrick shielded his eyes from the breaking light as the sun pierced the clouds, fracturing into gold. The dragon raised his head, his wings fully unfurled now, glowing with heat and memory. Then Arachitar ran, not in a hurry, but with purpose. His limbs dug into the earth, and with a final surge, he leapt from a ridge. He didn't fall. He rose. The wind caught him, lifting him higher with a cry that shattered the silence below. It wasn't a roar. It was a scream of release, a joy too immense to be contained. His body twisted midair, his wings pulsing, tail arcing like a comet's tail across the sky. The clouds parted, and the silver god returned. Yarrick watched in awe, his breath held tight in his chest. The sight was impossible, a moment too pure to fully grasp. Arachitar dove once, then climbed higher, faster than sound, beyond the storm, passing to the upper reaches of the atmosphere where silence reigned. As he ascended, something strange began to happen. A pulse rippled through the air, faint lights flickering like sparks from a broken universe. Trailing behind him, Jarrick's hands shook as the realization hit him. Arachitar wasn't just flying. He was calling them back. The lost dragons, the star beasts, his brothers and sisters of the forgotten sky. By the time Arachitar landed, the valley had changed. The air shimmered with energy. The earth hummed beneath their feet. The envoys had fallen to one knee, their heads bowed in reverence. Arachitar turned toward Yarrick, his eyes filled with ancient knowing. They remember me, Yarrick whispered. You gave them something to remember. No, Arachitar said softly. You did. The world had shifted, and at its center stood a mechanic and a dragon he had brought back from silence. The sky darkened as the second arrival approached. This wasn't the natural twilight that blanketed Zephyr's horizon. No, this was something deliberate, something cold. A shadow pushed through the clouds, swallowing the stars as it came. Yarrick was in the garage when the power flickered. The air stilled. Even the envoys, normally stoic and composed, looked up in unease. Arachitar emerged from his resting place beneath the cliffs, wings tucked in, eyes sharp. "They've come." "Who?" Yerrick asked, tension creeping into his voice. "The ones who put me in chains," Arachitar growled. "The architects." Yerrick stepped outside, jaw clenched. A ship unlike any he had ever seen descended from the sky. It wasn't shaped like any vessel of this world. Silent, angular, a perfect wedge of obsidian etched with constellations that didn't belong to their sky. It didn't fly. It glided, a crack in the atmosphere that exhaled no sound. The ship landed far beyond the envoys, but everyone felt it. Its presence was like cold water spilling over a fire, dousing the warmth of the valley. A single figure emerged, clad in white. No armor, no face, only a mask carved from starlight and silence. Arachitar's wings spread, his body rising with a growl that rattled the stones beneath them. "You dare come now, after 100 years?" The architect's voice didn't need to carry. It slipped into their minds like frost. "You were not meant to return. I was never meant to be forgotten." Arachitar spat. "You disobeyed," the architect's voice echoed. "You showed them mercy. And for that I was broken," Arachitar finished. The architect's voice didn't need to carry. It slipped into their minds like frost. "You were not meant to return. I was never meant to be forgotten." Arachitar spat. "You disobeyed," the architect's voice echoed. "You showed them mercy. And for that I was broken," Arachitar finished. As the valley settled into the quiet after the architect's departure, the weight of what had transpired hung in the air like the lingering scent of rain. The envoys, their robes shimmering faintly in the twilight, stood still as statues, each one reflecting the same quiet reverence. They had witnessed the impossible, the return of a lost legend, and yet they knew it wasn't just Arachitar who had risen from the ashes. It was something far greater, a forgotten piece of the universe stirring to life once more. Yerrick stood at the edge of his workshop, hands still trembling, the weight of his journey settling within him like a heavy mantle. He had never intended for this, to awaken a god, to unlock the ancient doors of fate. He was just a mechanic, a man who fixed broken things. But in his hands, something far more profound had unfolded. Arachitar's wings fluttered softly in the wind, their silver light dimming, no longer the blinding bursts of power they had once been. His body, while still marked by the scars of his imprisonment, carried a different kind of energy now, one of purpose. He was no longer the chained creature left to wither in the cold embrace of time. He was free, but in that freedom there was more than just flight. There was a calling, a return to the world of stories and histories long lost. The stars above seemed to pulse with life, as if acknowledging the return of something they had almost forgotten. Arachitar's gaze remained fixed on the night sky, his ancient eyes reflecting the constellations that had once been his birthright. The bridge between worlds was opening, and he was ready to cross it. "I'll go with you," Yerrick said finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him. "Whatever comes next, I'll follow, but not as a servant, as an equal." Arachitar's head turned slowly, a knowing smile in his eyes. "You've always been more than what you think, Yerrick. You built my wings once. Now you'll help me soar." The mechanic turned toward the half-finished sky, crawler resting on the edge of the platform. It was no longer just a ship. It was a testament to the journey they had both undertaken. It was a symbol of the bond forged between man and legend, mechanic and beast. And together they would fly. As Arachitar spread his wings and leaped into the air once more, the world seemed to hold its breath. The valley, the envoys, even the distant stars. They were all witnesses to the beginning of something new. The skies stretched open before them. No longer just a place of flight, but a realm of endless possibilities. The storms that had once defined Arachitar's existence were now merely a memory, replaced by the calm of freedom, by the unbroken bond between those who had been left behind and those who had never stopped believing. And so they rose together, man and dragon, both broken and reborn. As they soared through the heavens, the old ships of the envoys slowly disappeared into the distance. their silhouettes fading as the morning sun began to burn away the last remnants of the night. They were no longer just travelers in a forgotten world. They were part of something far greater. The stars themselves were waking, and with them, a new chapter had begun. In the end, Yarrick knew this. What had started in the ruins of a dying ship had evolved into something much more. It wasn't just about fixing machines anymore. It was about restoring balance, mending what had been broken, and, in the process, discovering the true power of mercy, redemption, and the stories that make up the fabric of the universe. No longer just a mechanic, Yarrick had become a part of that grand tale, a tale that would echo through the stars, long after their flight had taken them beyond the reach of time.